Okay, so for those that don't know me, I'm Dawin Sichimba. So we want to look at biostatistics. Hopefully we can look at the first two lessons uh, for this first part, because at 17 hours I have something that I have to attend to. So we want to see how far we can go for now, and then maybe later in the evening, I can still communicate to you that we're going to have another lesson, probably at 18 or 18:30, somewhere there. I hope you pardon me for that. I really have quite a lot to do. Okay, are we all able to see the screen? Hello?
I can see it
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Yes, we're
All right.
able to.
Okay, so I'll basically try to use the same PowerPoint for Professor Siziya. Okay, so and then we'll try to follow through, and I'll be trying to add in a few things as I explain. Okay, so those are the objectives. So at the end of this lesson, or rather these slides, you should be able to define statistics, differentiate between statistics and biostatistics, and also appreciate the importance of biostatistics in the medical field. So those are the major objectives as we look at this. Now, let's try to define what statistics is before we can look at biostatistics itself, all right? So now, we define statistics as a science that deals with basically 5 things. That is, one, there's collection, all right, data collection, organization, analysis, interpretation, and presentation. Okay, so those are the major things that are involved when you are looking at statistics. So how do you collect data? How do you organize this data? How do you analyze it? How do you interpret it? And how do you present it? Okay. So now, by the way, we should understand that there's a difference between data and information. Okay. So information is basically processed data, isn't it? So once it is processed, by the time you are reaching the point of presenting it, it's no longer data, it's basically information, because you have processed it and you've given it much more meaning. Okay, so now let's look at these one by one. I'll not go into much details. I will try to define them and try to discuss a few things about each of these 5 components of statistics. So when you look at data collection, it is the process of gathering and measuring information on targeted variables. Okay, so you have targeted variables that you want to get information from, or rather data from, and then you also have to measure it. Now, this is done in an established system, okay, which enables one to answer relevant questions and evaluate the outcomes. So once you collect the data, okay, in a systematic or some sort of established system, okay, so that by gathering and measuring it, then what happens next? It is going to enable you to answer relevant questions and also evaluate the outcomes. Okay, so these follow each other in a systematic way. You cannot start with presentation before you collect data. You cannot maybe, let's say, start with analysis before you organize your data. You have to go in that particular order. You first collect, then you organize the data, then you analyze it. After analyzing it, you interpret what does it mean. Then from there, you present it to the people that want to present it to in different ways. So how do you collect this data? For example, you can use a questionnaire, right? I'm sure most of us are quite familiar with questionnaires, okay? And as well as surveys. So you find that someone is going to come up with maybe an online survey or maybe a questionnaire that a targeted group of people is going to answer, okay? So that they are able to collect the data that they want to collect, okay? Another way of collecting data is through interviews, okay? So you can meet people, you can meet several people according to the population that you want to target. You meet those people, you interview them, and then you get the information that you need from them. So that is another way of collecting data. Another way of collecting data is through things such as documents. For example, if you are doing, let's say, a retrospective study based in the hospital, okay? So let's say, for example, you want to look at outcomes, let's say outcomes of traumatic brain injury. I'll give that example because I'm very much interested in such, okay? No bias. So let's say I want to look at the outcomes of management of traumatic brain injury at a setting, let's say, for example, at Ndola Teaching Hospital. So how are you going to do that? You cannot start following patients where they have gone because you don't know them. So what you do is you go in the hospital, you seek permission, and then you start getting files of all patients that presented with it, or rather that came to the hospital due to traumatic brain injury in a particular period. Let's say, for example, in the year 2019, or maybe in the year 2020, and so on, okay? In a specified period of time. So then you look at those files. As you look at those files, you're trying to get several data about the patient, bio data, okay? I look at maybe the age of patients that come, what are the major causes of traumatic brain injury in our setting, and then before you can even go to the outcomes themselves, you look at several factors. Do they have any other comorbidities? That is, do they have any other illnesses before that injury came in? Did they have any other illnesses that may probably affect the outcome? You find that you are probably trying to treat this patient who came with a traumatic brain injury, but because they are also having some other underlying conditions such as hypertension or maybe diabetes and so on, okay? So you find that the outcome of management of that condition is going to be distorted. Why? Because there's some other underlying condition, okay? So then you look at the outcomes themselves. Then you try to compare and see what could be affecting the outcomes. Why is it that in as much as you're trying to, no matter how much effort you try to put in, maybe patients are dying, okay? Or what are the challenges in managing those patients? Is it because of resources and so on and so forth? So you come up with such information and then you proceed, okay? So that is another way of collecting data. I mentioned through documents and files, let's say, for example, in a hospital, okay? Then another way of collecting data is through what are called focus groups, okay? So focus groups is more like some sort of an interview, but not a one-to-one interview, okay? So for example, if I come at school at Copperbelt University School of Medicine, and then I gather, let's say, about 10 students, okay? We sit together, we sit down, and then we are asking questions. I'm asking questions, more like an interview where I have more than one interviewee, okay? Then that is called a focus group. So that is another way of collecting data, okay? So there are several other ways of collecting data. Then let's move to organization. How do you organize data, or rather, what does it mean? So the method of, this is the method of classifying and organizing data sets to make them more useful, okay? And this can be either physical or digital records, okay? So as you're organizing that data, they can either be in form of physical records or digital records. For example, it can be writing on paper, or you can be using maybe a computer and so on, okay? So you are trying to organize that data so that it can become more useful, because you find that you cannot start looking at each and every part of that. For example, if you are doing hello, can everyone hear?
Hi.
Yes, we're here.
Okay, all right, thanks. Okay, so I was saying that, for example, if you are trying to undertake let's say maybe what is called a scoping review, okay, where you have to look at several articles. Now, when you have those articles, you need to group them. For example, when you look at processes such as eligibility criteria, okay? When you look at eligibility criteria, okay, you need to classify, you need to put data together Those that the parameters that are meeting the criteria, you put them together. Those that are not meeting the criteria, you exclude them from the study, isn't it? So you are trying to organize the data. Then let's look at analysis now. Data analysis is the most crucial part of statistics. Okay, so data analysis, it is a process of systematically applying statistical and or logical techniques to describe and illustrate, condense and recap and evaluate data. Okay, so you are trying to logically or systematically describe and illustrate the data that you have collected and perhaps organized, okay, into useful forms. Okay, so you illustrate, you evaluate the data so that it makes more meaning. Okay, now this is important because it ensures that data integrity is accurate and appropriate. Okay, so when you collect that data, some of it may not be so accurate and it may not even be so appropriate, but by analyzing it, you make sure that the integrity of the data that you've collected is more accurate and appropriate. I hope we are following each other and getting there. Hello? Any
We are following.
before I can continue? Are there any questions?
No.
Okay.
You can elaborate a little more on data analysis again?
Okay, I've not yet finished on data analysis. So I was saying that data analysis, it is the process, okay, of systematically applying, okay, systematically applying statistical, all right. Remember, looking at statistics, isn't it? So it can either be statistical techniques, or we can also incorporate some logical techniques. Okay, so you don't have to be bound to the statistics itself, but you also have to apply some logical techniques as you are trying to analyze. Okay, so it is a process of systematically applying statistical and or logical techniques to describe, illustrate, condense, and recap, as well as evaluate the data. Okay, so I mentioned that this is important for ensuring data integrity is accurate and appropriate. Now, I also mentioned that it is the most crucial part of research. Now, data analysis basically summarizes the collected data. So after you collect that data, it is going to be summarized in data analysis. When you analyze it, it's going to be more summarized than it was when you just collected it. Okay, then it also involves the interpretation of data gathered through the use of analytical and logical reasoning to determine patterns and relationships and trends. For example, so let me just check in the charts. Okay, so I've just read from the charts that I should concentrate on something. So let me first try to go through the things that like the lessons themselves according to the PowerPoints that I was given, and then if I need to elaborate on some aspects and all, I'll definitely do that. Okay, because I want to be a bit more systematic and try to make sure that we don't get confused as we proceed. Okay, so let's look at interpretation. Okay, So what does it mean to interpret data? What is interpretation? So this is the process of reviewing data through some predefined processes, okay, which will help assign some meaning to the data and arrive at a relevant conclusion. Now, from analysis, after analysis, okay, remember we mentioned that it is going to help, okay, or rather it helps us to, it helps us to make sure that we arrive at certain conclusions by determining the patterns, the relationships and the trends. For example, if you are looking at, let's say, maybe let's say malaria, okay, then you, or maybe flu, okay, let's say flu. So you want to look at patients that presented with flu in a particular period of time, let's say in a year's period. Then you're going to discover that at a particular season, okay, at a particular season, there were more people that were presenting with that particular condition than other seasons, okay? So you make a conclusion from there to say, okay, so in this particular season, especially if you've done it over a period of time, let's say, for example, for 2 years or 3 years, okay, then you'll find that maybe patients are presenting with that particular condition, let's say around January, February, March. Also in the following year, they'll present, more are going to present in that same particular period. Then you're going to come up with a trend and also a pattern, okay, and so on. So now, when you look at interpretation, it is the process of reviewing data through some predefined processes, which will help assign some meaning to the data and arrive at relevant conclusion, okay? So after you collect the data, you organize it and analyze it. Then you are going to interpret it. What does it mean? In other words, you're trying to give meaning to what you've analyzed, to what you have gotten, okay? Then after you analyze and give meaning to your information, you now have to present it to the targeted audience. What people are you targeting that information to, okay? Who should listen to that? Who should see that information? So you can present that data in different ways, okay? I think there's a lesson on that data presentation, okay? So you can use, for example, frequency tables, you can use charts, and so on and so forth to present that particular information that you've gotten, okay? So remember, we're just trying to define statistics. We said that statistics is a science that deals with collection, organization, analysis, interpretation, and presentation of numerical information, okay? Now, what is a statistic? A statistic is basically what is referred to as an estimate of some unknown numerical quantity, okay? So it is also a characteristic of a sample. For example, let's give an example. So let's say, for example, if we picked on a random sample, okay, if we select a random sample of, let's say, 100 students, okay, then that 100 students from a group of 1,000 students. So let's say in school there are about 1,000 students, and then we randomly select about 100 students, okay. Then if we look at the average height of those selected students, those selected 100 students, then that average is what is called a statistic, is an example of a statistic, okay? So it is an estimate of an unknown numerical quantity. So in this case, the numerical quantity that we're talking about is the height of students, but we want to estimate on average what is the height of all the students in that selected sample of students. So that is what is called a statistic. Okay. So by the way, the meeting may end in the next 10 minutes. Once it ends, please make sure that you join within a minute. Okay. Now let's look at what biostatistics is. What is biostatistics? Now we can see from there that it's like there are two uh, words, okay? In this it's a compound word, right? So we have the bio part and the statistics part, okay? So bio obviously it's referring to biology, okay, or other biological sciences, and then statistics, as we have already defined, okay, which is a process or rather a science that deals with collection, organization, analysis, interpretation, and presentation of numerical information. So now, when we say about statistics, we are talking about the application of statistics to these biological sciences. So we have the biological sciences, and then we want to apply statistics to it. So we have what is called biostatistics. So it encompasses the design of biological experiments, the collection and analysis of data from those experiments, and interpretation of the results. So you come up with an experiment that you want to do. After that experiment is done, you collect the data, or rather the information from that, you analyze the information, and then you also interpret and eventually present that information from that experiment. So we should note that the fundamental statistical methods do not change at all, okay, across the disciplines. We can talk about biological sciences, we can talk about economics, we can talk about what. So across the disciplines, these basic or rather fundamental statistical methods do not change at all, okay? But the application, the way in which we apply them is what may differ from one discipline to another. So how you're going to apply statistics to biological sciences is going to differ to how you're going to apply it in let's say economics and so on and so forth, okay? So that is about biostatistics. So this is what I was saying. Fundamental statistical methods do not change across disciplines, but the application and the problems to be solved is what may differ, okay? All right. Then why is it important to do this, or rather to study biostatistics? This is quite straightforward. So number one, to make good clinical decisions, okay? And this happens in order to distinguish between discrepant data and routine variability. So you find that there are certain times when there are certain conditions. For example, let's say it's a condition, it's a particular disease in the hospital, okay, that you're coming across. So sometimes it may be a rare condition, sometimes it may be a frequent condition. For example, if you're talking about, let's say, patients that present with cough, you cannot start, let's say you even know that most of the times patients that come with bronchogenic carcinoma, there are those that are quite elderly, okay, older patients. There's no way you can start thinking of such in a patient who is, let's say, for example, let's say below 20 years old. Yes, it's possible to think of that, but for you to reach that to such a point, it means that you've probably tried to exclude all other possibilities, okay? So you are trying to distinguish between discrepant data and routine variability, okay? So also to understand and evaluate medical literature in an intelligent manner, okay? So you want to base your understanding and your decisions on much evidence, okay? So do the conclusions hold based on the design of the study, type of analysis performed, and the applicability of these statistical tests used, okay? Also to change the way you practice your profession by relying on the literature or for new information. So medicine, it's dynamic, things change, things are never constant. So you always have to rely on new information that is coming up. Then to understand the principles underlying the computations performed by the computer. So you find that, remember, we said that it can be physical, they can be physical, or or digital. Okay. So when you collect that data, it can be kept in as physical or numerical. Now, if you are doing computations, or rather if you are doing calculations using the computer, you still need to understand what exactly is happening, what has been done for you to arrive at such a point. Then to understand the meaning of computer output, same with what I've explained, then to have an appreciation of biostatistics so that you know when and for what purpose a biostatistician should be consulted in medical research. Now, let me give a simple example. In routine medical practice, okay, you find that you receive a patient. Let's say you are in surgical ward, okay, you're working in surgical ward, and then you have a patient who has probably a medical condition. Now, you need to understand medical conditions for you to actually acknowledge that this is a medical condition, and I need to consult a physician and not a surgeon. Okay, so you will not be able to consult someone if you don't understand that this particular problem may be solved by such a person. Okay, so that is basically the summary, and I think that is the end of the first lecture. Hello? Okay, so I'm trying to read some messages from the chat. Now, when people are sending messages in the chat, it's not so easy for me to read them while I'm presenting. Okay, so I'll probably be coming to look at them after I finish.